Welcome to County Conversations. My name is Ryan Gregoire. I am your association's legislative director. With just a few days left remaining in the state legislative session, we thought we would come together and give everyone an update on what we're hearing, what we're seeing in the state legislature with regard to some of our priority issues this year. And joining me today is Dave Lucas, our Director of Intergovernmental Affairs and Finance.
Thank you, Ryan. Glad to be here.
So, Dave, one of the top issues that we were facing during the budget negotiations was this concept of changing the way that we handle in-rem tax foreclosure proceedings. Homeowners who owe property taxes, who are delinquent, and their homes are, under the threat of or under active foreclosure. So can you tell us a little bit about what the legislature is planning on doing, where things stand right now, and what we're trying to do?
We'll go back to how we started in this process. As you mentioned, the in-rem changes were in the state budget. And the changes proposed in the budget were really in anticipation of a pending case before the U.S. Supreme Court about this situation. And it had to do with situations where a tax foreclosure occurred and there was funds available above what was owed in taxes and penalties. And at that time, during the budget process, the case hadn't even been held before the Supreme Court yet. They haven't had their hearing.
Sure.
So they had that hearing at the end of April. We did convince the legislature at that time and the executive to just take it out of the budget so we knew more about what the court would decide. So in late April, they had the arguments, the oral arguments. And then last week, or maybe 10 days ago, the court made their decision and released it.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, it does leave a lot of open questions.
Very vague.
Yeah, no Supreme Court decision provides you a detailed roadmap of where they want you to go. They just sort of point you in a direction, and how you get there is a whole nother story. So we're left with 5 or 6 days in session.
Yeah.
We don't really have a lot of clarity exactly on the Supreme Court decision, other than if there is a surplus, the money should go back to the prior owner. But it leaves a lot of questions for New York State, and there's a lot of big questions. But that initial issue, there was a timing issue. We didn't know the arguments. We're still kind of stuck under that timing quandary right now because it is so close to the end of the session. It's a very complex section of law. We have 30 years of case law behind it. And much of the process we use in New York is fine today. Mm-hmm. The only really issue is what do we do in this case of a surplus? Well, we're in a situation where under state law today, we don't have authority to return a surplus. Even if we did an auction next month and there was a surplus, we have no way of giving it back. But there's a lot of other questions raised about how do we implement this going forward? Are there things we need to change in our current law? I think where the counties are in this situation is we should probably wait a little bit.
Yeah.
A little bit longer.
Longer than 4 days?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Within 4 days, we're not going to have a perfect solution to this. And regardless of what law the state introduces and writes, there's going to be litigation.
Yeah.
Whether you're the homeowner or the county or somebody else that's involved, a lien holder, a mortgage, a bank, a mortgage holder, there's going to be litigation if they feel they weren't, treated fairly in this process. And that's the thing. That's all the detail in the law that we need is to clarify what happens in this situation. How do I know who the prior owner is? There could be one name on a deed, but that person's married and that the wife's name isn't on the deed or the husband's name isn't on the deed.
Sure.
I can't just give back the money to the one name because under state law, that other person has rights as well.
Exactly.
So a lot of these things need to be clarified, and that's what we're looking for. We're looking for a little bit more time. We also thought that the governor's initial proposal, had some drafting issues in it. And now late in the session, as you mentioned, the legislature is sort of going in a totally different direction. They're spending a little bit of time in their bills talking about surplus, but 90% of the proposals they're talking about have nothing to do with the Supreme Court case.
Right.
So it's causing a lot of confusion. We don't really need to change everything. Let's deal with the surplus. And if we want to change other things in the future, we can do that. I think the situation we're in now with the legislature is the primary bill they seem to be pushing is going in a completely different direction and has almost nothing to do with the Supreme Court case. And
Yeah.
some of it's things that have been tried in the past, and we have comptroller opinions and other things about why some of these things don't make sense.
Dave, one of the key provisions that the legislature is negotiating in this bill is this concept of paying reverse chronological order of your outstanding tax bills. What does that even mean?
Yeah, the way it works today is, let's say you're 3 years in arrears. What if you come in and say, okay, I'm going to pay some of my old taxes? What we do under current law is you pay the most recent unpaid tax first, but that leaves you in the foreclosure process.
Sure.
What the legislature wants to do is allow the taxpayer to pay the oldest tax first, which takes them out of foreclosure, but then the next year, when they don't pay their taxes again, they're back in foreclosure.
Yeah, so there's
So-
2 years that they never have to pay. It's
Exactly.
outstanding.
Yep, and for some, and not every county does this exactly on a 2-year basis. So you could be 3-4 years in arrears
Sure.
and never really have to pay that. You have to pay some interest and penalties, but that gets into an arbitrage issue in the market with interest rates. It's like, can I game
Well,
the system in some way?
And there's another
Somebody
proposal
could.
out there that would lower the cap on interest
Yes.
rate penalties. We won't go there right
Yeah.
now. That's a whole
Yeah.
other issue. We could do an entire podcast on that. But so I think the key takeaway right now for the members is to understand that there is a strong desire in the legislature to basically change 3 very large sections of real property and tax law in New York State. Whole cloth change them.
Yeah.
Change the entire process, despite the Supreme Court basically ruling, look, you really only need to be addressing the surplus after a sale takes place.
Mhm.
That's really what the Supreme Court has said. The proposals out there do way more than that.
Yes,
That's what
they
I'm
do.
hearing.
Yes.
Yes.
Exactly.
So for our members, they should realize that we're opposing those current bills as drafted. We want to sit down with all the stakeholders and work out some kind of an agreement. This isn't something that can be done in the next 4 days of session, to be honest.
Yeah.
And if you listen to Leader Stewart Cousins, she just came out today and said, take a look at the calendar and keep an eye on the gray squares, meaning session is going to conclude at or around June 8th or 9th, is what the leader is telling us. So there's simply 1 week is just not enough time
Yeah.
to do this.
And an overriding complicating issue onto this is when someone goes into tax delinquency, the county is responsible for paying their taxes to whoever administered the tax. So if the school district, they didn't pay that, the county pays the school district the taxes
Right.
due. And they have to do that for years and years.
We're one of the few
So-
states in the country,
We may be
Where-
the only one.
or maybe the only one, where counties are required to keep everybody else whole for their uncollected taxes.
Yeah.
That is an outrageous policy,
Yeah.
and it's going to be on the top of our budget list
Yeah.
going into next
And none
year.
of the current proposals have any state support in there.
Of course not.
We need
You
to
know-
go back to the drawing board.
Yeah, one of the other key areas that I wanted to discuss with everyone are your tax extender bills. So that's sales tax, real estate transfer tax, hotel motel bed tax, and mortgage recording tax. There's 4 different ones out there right now. Those bills, by and large, have all passed through the Senate. There's a few that haven't, and that's just based on timing of when those bills were introduced. But everyone has passed the Senate. The Assembly right now is a little bit of a holdup. Most of the bills sit in the Assembly Ways and Means Committee. They've not been reported to Rules or directly to the calendar yet. The reason why I bring this up is, again, it's a timing issue. There's only 4 days of session left. They have to get through hundreds of bills still. And in the Assembly, it takes a lot longer, even under fast roll call rules, to get bills to pass through that chamber. They have to report it out of Ways and Means. They've got to report it out of Rules Committee. It's got to go to the calendar and then be brought up for a vote. So the reason I bring this up is because I'm encouraging everyone, if your home rule tax extender bill has not passed through both houses, and the vast majority have not yet, you need to be calling your assembly member and demanding that that bill gets onto a floor agenda quickly, like on Monday. So that's the key takeaway for everyone there. Again, they've passed through the Senate. Another issue that I wanted to highlight, and then I've got one for you, Dave, is our number 2 priority on our end of session priority list, which is authorizing sales tax collections for Airbnb, vacation rental properties, companies. We've been asking the state legislature for a number of years now to really level the playing field with the hotels and the motels out there. So the Airbnbs and VRBOs would be responsible for paying sales tax on those stays. Hotels, if you stay in a hotel, you have to pay sales tax. It should be no different for an Airbnb. We finally have a bill that satisfies a lot of issues that have been outstanding, but unfortunately, I do think the bill will pass the Senate, but it's not going to pass the Assembly this year. There's still some hiccups internally. I do not project that bill passing, so that's going to be one of our budget issues for next year. We're going to have to ask the governor to introduce that, put it in her executive budget proposal. It benefits the state. They get their 4%, and then, of course, the counties get our local share as well. So I did want to bring that up and give everyone an update on that bill. There is some good news, though, Dave, on the extension of our ability to safely invest available free cash, essentially, or unencumbered fund balances in investment options. Can you tell us a little bit about what exists under current law and this bill that Senator Martinez is carrying for us?
Yes. So this started back in the early 1990s. There was, for the city of New York, obviously the center of finance in America and really the world, they gave the city the ability, they gave them more options for investing public monies.
Yeah.
Nothing fancy, they're not buying derivatives or anything like that, but something that gives you a better return. So
Sure.
certain
Better
types,
than 0.1%?
Yeah, some high-grade corporate debt, different types of mutual funds you could buy into, or money market funds, things like that. Get a little bit better return, but when you're sitting on some cash that you're not going to use right away, it would be nice to get some return back.
Yeah.
And the big thing now too is in the current situation, the Federal Reserve is increasing interest rates, so you can get a much better interest rate in some of this overnight investment funds that you can, commercial paper, what it might be, you can get a better return on it. So it's pretty important to the counties. The counties got this authority about 3 years ago. We were added in and allowed to do what New York City does, and we've had pretty good success with that.
Yeah.
I think most counties are using this to some degree. There's several $billion, approaching several $billion invested in these new options. So it's really great. It's a better return.
Saving taxpayers a lot of money.
Yeah, so the more interest we earn, it's the less money we need to raise from taxpayers at the end of the day. So it's a really good proposal. We're assuming it will pass. It's been renewed every 3 years for the city going back to the early 1990s, and we're hoping it'll move here again.
Yeah, there shouldn't be any controversy with this.
Okay.
Another piece of legislation that has come up from members across the state is the need to do something with our emergency medical system in the state. It's really, we've been hearing from counties all over about the failing state of our EMS. And there's a lot of bills out there that address a variety of areas within that complex policy arena. But one bill that we've been advocating for, it's a Senator, Mayor, Assembly Member Steve Otis. They're both from Westchester County. It's a piece of legislation that would authorize counties the ability to work with their municipalities to create joint taxing districts to properly fund EMS services. This is a bipartisan issue in our organization. Just about every single county that I've heard from, and it's over 20 counties now, are looking for this authority. And to the credit of Senator Mayer and Assembly Member Otis, they've been pushing really hard to get this bill done. Again, though, I think we're facing some stiff opposition from outside influencers that I'm not even sure are in opposition of this bill right now. but I don't expect that bill to pass this session. I think there's just too much headwind and not enough time to hammer out a deal.
Yeah.
So again, I know our champions in the legislature are disappointed about that outcome. But if anything, we can double down our efforts and push again next year.
It's a problem, unfortunately, that's not going away, and the volunteer system we're using in a lot of these circumstances, just you can't get volunteers anymore to do it, and
We need some leadership from the state.
yeah,
It's got to come from the state.
and it's overwhelming. We're talking about response times, improving those, professionalizing, you know.
And we're talking about the ability to get people to an ER when
Yeah.
they really need to be.
Yeah.
So more to come on the state of our EMS system. There's much more work to be done in that arena. And again, just like we did this year, we'll be putting forth another package of EMS proposals that we'll be advocating for next year as well. Dave, before we wrap up here, anything else you wanted to address, bring up to speed for our members at this point?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of what we do, there's like, how many bills introduced? 14,000, and probably
15,180 bills.
It's a world record, I guess, or something. I don't know. It's a lot of bills. There's a lot of things in there we watch
Yes.
that are expensive for counties or are unnecessary, and we spend a lot of time tracking those and letting the legislature know our thoughts on some of these proposals.
We are, and I call it actively tracking, meaning we've commented on or are in discussions on roughly 3,000 of the 15,000 bills. And I am sure that of that remaining 12,000 bills, there are some that impact counties that we're just not aware of.
Yes.
So stay tuned for our end of session report. We're going to be publishing a report as we do every year that will analyze all of the bills that have passed through both houses that have an impact on county operations. That'll be coming out a few days after session concludes. And again, thanks for tuning in to this episode of County Conversations.
Thank you.